Welcome to Reddit Reads r/ProRevenge. Our first Reddit post is from Yazdan. Don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding, or this might just happen to you. Originally I posted this to ProRevenge, but I think it belongs here. Last summer, I was at a cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both sides of the family. However, after the ceremony was over, and the party had only just started, one of the bridesmaids decided to announce her own engagement. The attention was immediately taken away from the newlyweds and brought to the bridesmaid, who I'll call Sarah, and her equalise McFyink. My cousin's wife, I'll call her Emma, didn't make a scene or utter a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she kept grinning and acted very happy for the other couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind, no matter the consequences. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honor at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there for it, but my cousin sent me some of the best bits on Snapchat and explained the whole situation. This is where the fun begins. Emma's two McYounger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the very last moment, Emma switched out the white petals in their baskets to blue ones she had secretly brought with her. She told her sisters not to say anything about it or let the bride see them until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. Sarah looked very confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't coordinate whatsoever with her theme, but of course, she didn't say anything about it in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were also Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on Emma's scheme. At the reception, Emma's sisters and the other bridesmaids were tight-lipped when Sarah began demanding to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner ended up getting a lot of abuse for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen, displaying a loop of photos with Sarah and her husband, which had been compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen, and at first she showed some pre-approved humorous photos of Sarah with Emma and other friends to facilitate a couple light-hearted jokes. Then, at the very end, Emma said to Sarah that she must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white ones originally planned. That was when Emma displayed the last slide from her presentation. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant, and that she just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals. The last slide, her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I sincerely regret watching the Snapchat recordings with headphones. Apparently, Sarah had been very nasty to her bridesmaids before, driving several of them away and forcing the others to pay ridiculous amounts of money for dresses. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother went to confront her outside, and Emma retorted with, "Gentle, gentle. I'm pregnant." I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to the majority of those bridesmaids anymore. The drive self-important bridesmaid announces her engagement at my cousin's wedding, stealing the spotlight from him and his bride. Said bridesmaid foolishly names my cousin's wife her maid of honor and behaves like a complete bridezilla. Cousin's wife sabotaged her wedding to announce her own pregnancy. Edit, thank you, kind stranger, for the gold. Edit 2, oh wow, silver 2. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. Yet another edit, platinum. Huge thanks to everyone for the kindness. This comment is from Pepamictwo. You'll never understand why people. This comment is from Tangiblesis. Exactly what I was thinking. This comment is from Practice Free. Keeping up appearances. Imagine being in a place where the narrative of your life is more important than actual relationships, and you get this. Our next Reddit post is from Jonna Provolone. The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked upon in my group of friends even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public, so let's get into this shitstorm. Backstory: I was a senior in high school at the time and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Mrs. Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless bitch who the administrators saw as the golden child. Mrs. Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again. Wow, surprise, surprise, you don't understand it again, really. We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we?" etc., etc. I tried going to the administration about it before, but again she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day and go back to being a bitch the next. This goes on for about half the year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year and am sitting in Mrs. Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote because it's burned into my brain, was, "Is been teaching here for over 10 years, and that was the single dumbest question is ever heard come from a nyone's mouth." She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece. I sat down with the principal, and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present as well as Mrs. Frank's. He told me we would meet the next day where I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I'll walk into school the next morning being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Mrs. What follows was some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Mrs. Frank go from confident and stuck up to her realizing that she had fucked up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself. The tape ended, and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment, and the principal turns to me and says, "I think we have heard everything we need to, thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Mrs. Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Mrs. Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school, and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Mrs. Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go fuck yourself. TL Drive, my high school teacher belittled me all year. I secretly recorded her, showed the administrators, and got her fired. Edit 1 should have cleared this up in the story, however, I didn't want to go into too much detail about the process. Yes, this was perfectly legal to do, and my parents and I did our research to make sure we weren't breaking any kind of law. In my state, you can record someone in their place of business without both parties' consent. Edit 2. Wow, thank you for the gold, kind strangers. I believe this post became popular because almost everyone can relate to having a horrible teacher at one point in their life. I'm glad I could give some satisfaction to some of you who have had similar situations. Thank you for all the great feedback. Edit 3. I want to address some frequently asked questions. I regret sharing the dumbed-down version because I left out the amount of shit I put my parents through during all of this. Tons of meetings and phone calls that would have made the story a lot longer, and I didn't think anyone would enjoy reading it. One, I do not still have the tapes. It was in the administration's best interest to keep them in case she sued for false termination, and it would have gotten out of hand if the tapes spread and gave a bad reputation towards the district. Even if I kept the tapes, this all took place over 15 years ago, and there's no way in hell I would be able to find them. 2. Yes, I took algebra as a senior because, again, I wasn't the greatest student to walk those halls, and throughout all my years of school I had tutoring. I'm sorry I'm not a genius. 3. I don't remember what question I asked that pushed me over the limit that day. Thank you for all of the feedback, and I love reading each and every own stories that have had similar teachers and revenge. This comment is from Reserfer. Always keep your words soft and sweet, just in case you have to eat them. Andy Rooney. Edit awoke this. To more thoughts and ruminations from many of you. This quote appears to have resonated with many, like 7,500 of you. Hope I got responses to those who posted. Namaste. This comment is from Samsam705. Damn. I love that her own words were her undoing. This comment is from Narrowsmith. Yeah, this is ideal pro-revenge. Only as harsh as it needs to be. Now, a word from today's sponsor. Surfshark is an all-around VPN solution that can do everything from torrenting as well as streaming to browsing the dark web. Surfshark is one of the very best all-round VPN, terrific for Netflix, torrenting, confidential browsing, as well as staying safe on public Wi-Fi. Check out Surfshark today, link is in the description. Now back to the video. That was Reddit Reads r/ProRevenge. If you like this content, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified of new uploads. We upload new videos every day. Also subscribe to our Patreon, as that will help us a lot. See you next time.